Sharon and Russell, whenever you guys are ready to get started, we can get started.
Okay.
Doesn't look like we have a lot of other people signed up on the sign-in form that haven't joined.
Edwin,
Can we unmute Sharon?
Oh, yep. She was there for a bit. Do you want me to give the pre-meeting spiel while you wait for her to unmute?
Yes, please.
Okay. Oh, there she goes. Welcome. If this is your first time joining us for one of our virtual meetings, you'll notice that everyone will remain muted throughout the meeting with the exception of the committee co-chairs, Russell Squire and Sharon Pope-Marshall. As we go through the meeting, the co-chairs will call on members of the public and other board members who wish to speak. You can participate by going to the reactions icon at the bottom of your screen and pressing the raise hand button. It's not the wave or the thumbs up, those will disappear. Only press the raise hand button once. If you press it a second time, your hand will go back down. If you're calling in from the phone, it's *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute. Whenever the co-chairs call on you, be on the lookout for a prompt asking you to confirm unmuting so that you can begin speaking. The chat is available for technical support to help with Zoom software problems. It is not to ask questions of the co-chairs or any of the board members. They will not see those chats. If you're using an older version of Zoom, you'll need to go to the participants section at the bottom of your screen where you'll find the raise hand feature there. And then finally, please do not raise your actual hand or wave at the screen. We may not be able to see you and we may miss it. Chat me, I'm here for your support. Otherwise, I'll turn it back over to Russell and Sharon and they can get going.
All right, thank you. Sharon, you want to kick us off here?
yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. And a special shout out, by the way, to Michelle. It was her idea that we look at and divvy up pages from the actual legislation. And because of that, I think that we all learned a lot in the process. Welcome to the Planning Together Task Force. And what we did last month was begin the process of going line by line and page by page to look at how community boards would be, excuse me, I'm sorry, how community boards would be impacted and what our suggestions and recommendations would be. So I think that we ought to pick up where we left off last month and beginning with a review of the first, I think, 5 pages that we did. And Russell, would you like to give a little, just a little review and background, and then we'll start with page 5?
Sure. So I think just to sort of summarize broadly what we discussed last time with regard to the first few pages is, overall what I think we really wanted to see was with regard to land use specific items, well, really across the board. I mean, I think what we really wanted was for the plans for each community district to really be set by the community board itself, and essentially to avoid sort of top-down process that folks are concerned about, where community boards would potentially be told how zoning changes might be implemented, or sort of what the plan for a local community district should be, without input from the community board. And so the goal was really to have community districts plans be set by the community boards themselves. There was some, I think, sort of appetite for sort of citywide goals for some specific issues, and we talked about environmental, climate change related things, resiliency, sustainability, basically. But even there, I think the idea was to have a much more democratic way of going about it. But ultimately, for other areas, our view was that the targets should be set by the local community board as well, because fundamentally, the kinds of changes that you're potentially going to see and the kinds of planning that is under discussion is ultimately going to be driven very heavily by these targets. The other thing is, I think we wanted more public hearings over various changes that might come down the pike. And then the last thing is with regard to the director of long-term planning, or the person who's going to lead this sort of long-term planning process. We wanted more input and sort of more, essentially more broader input on who that person is going to be, and not to have it picked solely by the mayor. And maybe it would be a situation where the borough presidents would, jointly pick the person or something along those lines. But essentially, we weren't really comfortable with having that person be entirely, essentially, just a member of the administration, beholden to the mayor. I think another alternative that was broached was the idea of, having the person subject to council confirmation. So that was essentially what we covered last time. And then, we were going through the pages of the bill, and essentially, we're sort of flagging different areas where we would want to see those, those kinds of changes implemented. And then Sharon said, from there we divided up for this meeting. And so I think we can probably dive into what people came back with. Mm-hmm. Although I see Peter Patch has a hand up here at the outset.
Peter, you can unmute.
Yeah, there's one thing that you left out, Russell, and I'm not quite sure how you felt about it, but I believe I actually proposed that I believe we had a vote, and the vote carried, at least for this committee. It doesn't have to carry for the full board, that if our recommendations were not incorporated into the law, that we would oppose it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Important point. Thank you.
Sure. Yes, that's right. So the idea is basically what we're proposing and what we're suggesting is what we really want to see in it, and it's this or nothing, I think, is our view on this, as Peter said. So I think Michelle had the first set of 5 pages, so maybe Will, if you could put up on the screen her changes that she sent in, and we can just sort of talk over those.
Give me a second to get the thing on the page, but I also, Michelle should be able to unmute. All right, you guys should be able to see my Word document, I hope.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Michelle, what page are we starting on?
I think she had 5. Page 5, starting with page 5.
All right. Michelle, you're unmuted. Can you go?
Michelle? Do we want to jump to page 11 and wait till Michelle could join us?
Sure.
I see that she is online, so it's likely that she might be having some video communication problems.
Michelle, if you can hear me, sign out and sign back in, and usually that solves whatever problem it is. But if not, chat me and we can figure it out. So you want to go to whose,
Page 11.
but whose document?
Taina.
Taina's. Okay. All right, Taina, go ahead and unmute.
Hi, everyone. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Okay. We're not looking at mine yet, right?
No. Give me 1 second. Okay. What page? Sorry for the quick scroll. Page 15, is that right?
No,
I was 11 through
11, sorry.
11, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I didn't do a lot of, just full transparency here, I didn't do a lot of like mincing of words and line edits. I joined late last time. And so I'm realizing now that you guys really did a lot of actual changing of language in the first few pages, but I read through this and others can disagree and didn't see a lot of places where I thought there was like a ton wrong with the language. So I did comments in this first section. This is a reference to the reporting that would summarize like the issues faced by the city. And I just thought that public safety was lacking from this list. So this list had housing, employment, open space, transportation, education, city facilities, infrastructure, obviously, as you guys can all read. And I just feel like public safety is like an important concern to our community and really citywide. And so I was just recommending that that be added there. A lot of the rest of this language, if you want to scroll down, is really like the risk index, all these sort of reporting structures and opportunity indexes that exist. I didn't see a lot of room to make edits, frankly. Scroll down. I think for this one here, point 6 here, I don't know if these assessments or if this data is available, but I thought it'd be helpful to see an assessment of segregation by religion as well. So it currently has fair housing and school segregation by race, ethnicity, or income. I just think with the rise of anti-Semitic events in the city and just over the years, right, like a lot of Islamophobia, I think as well, might be helpful to see this broken out by religion as well, if it's data that the city can provide. The following ones, so such as like climate change analysis, waterfront resources, I thought this was comprehensive, frankly, if you want to scroll down well. This physical needs assessment and the rankings, I thought, again, covered. I thought this was really comprehensive and covered what we would need. Nothing stood out to me as like not being included that should be. If you want to keep going down. So this goes into the social equity reports. Again, these are all like reports that are required by sections of the charter. Again, I didn't see much of anything lacking or much of an area sort of to add or edit language. I think this is one area, and sorry, I actually thought I had put a comment in, but I didn't, where I think we could consider in this point, line 15, which references rezonings no less than 10 years and no greater than 15 years. I just wondered, and again, this is just a suggestion, whether we should be, just because rezonings take so much time to plan for and then to actually happen, whether there's a reason, whether we should question, why not go back further? So maybe make this more of like a 20-year look back. Because again, as we all know, it takes like rezonings just take years and years and years, and then once they're finished, they also take years to be seen through. So I thought maybe extending the time period here would be the only thing I would add. Yeah, so this section here was about an analysis that we would be provided about the impacts of rezonings, but I didn't feel like it got to the core, like this language got to the core of how we can get data that measures whether like the impact that a rezoning has on the overall quality of life of residents in the area of the rezoning. So it has all these just like very specific, like how many housing units and affordable housing units were created, you know, things like that. Did household income go up? But I felt like there could be room to add something more here, to have more of a survey of how a specific rezoning, all rezonings, impact the overall quality of life of residents. Again, I don't know if that's like language to be added about maybe surveying residents, but I don't know that all of these data points get to improvements in overall quality of life or lack of improvements in quality of life that occur as a result of rezoning. If you want to scroll down. So this is about like just the reports from this mentioned community boards, and I thought it was like everything felt appropriate, and I didn't see a need to add anything here. So this is about filings of the Department of City Planning, and I think we have just one more page. Yeah, I actually don't even think, do I have any other comments on this page? Well, I might not. Yep, I don't think I did.
No.
Yeah, I mean, I thought, again, these are like, unless, you know, like I haven't been on the board that long, unless there's like any dates that stand out to people, or that where like any of these like 60-day notice or amount of time that are being listed looks wrong to folks. This all felt to me pretty kosher. That's what I had.
Mm-hmm. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, thank you.
I don't know.
Good suggestions.
Peter, is your hand still up from before, or is that new for this? New, old? Okay, I'll lower your hand for you.
Is Michelle here? If not, we could go directly to page 16 through pages 16 through 20, which are mine.
Michelle, try to speak and let's see if we hear you this time. I heard noise from your Zoom earlier.
Okay, we'll
Michelle, you may even want to just restart your computer.
Yeah.
I think, should we, do you want to talk about these 5 pages first before we go on to the next section, or should we do everybody's first and then come back to different sections?
Yeah, you know what? Let's do everybody's first, and then, you know, we'll see if there's a trends or you know, something that we might be able to pick out and take a look at.
Okay, sounds good. All right, let's press on.
So
we're looking at Michelle's for those first 5 pages.
No,
if she's yeah, I don't think she's on yet. I think she probably signed off and is going to sign back on.
Just need to know which document to put up.
Sure, yeah. 16 through 20. Mine.
I need yours. Thank you.
Yeah, mine. Yeah, sorry about that.
No, it's okay. I just didn't label them by page numbers.
Yeah.
I labeled them by name.
And thank you so much, Will, for pulling all of this together.
Oh, yeah.
Really appreciate it.
You guys did the homework, so.
Well, without the technology, you know, we wouldn't be anywhere. All right. So for my document, I thought that it would be important to do a couple of things. One is to remind people, because my section begins with city planning, certifying documents for their completeness, applications for their completeness. And that begins the uniform land use review process. And so I put some background information, or included some background information just to remind people that community board input in the uniform land use review process was codified in the late 1970s, and it empowered and specifically gave community boards rights, if you will, to be a part of that process in terms of reviewing applications. And so with that in mind, I just had a couple of highlights. And the first one, it says that I'm sorry, I was getting ready to scroll down myself when I realized that, Will, you're controlling the screen. So the first highlight that I did was to include community board review and approval. So in this section, it talks about the department of creating rules, if you will, to determine whether applications align with the comprehensive long-term plan. And so I thought that it would be good if community boards were a part of that process, if they were a part of that approval process, because once land use applications are deemed certified by the commission, we're going to get those applications and make a determination as to whether or not we approve them or disapprove them. And being able to be a part of that process early, before the application is actually certified, I thought that that would be a good thing for community boards. Can you scroll down to the next yellow highlight? Okay. So in this section, it specifically mentions modifications. And, if I understand this correctly, it does, if there are modifications, the community board is not advised. And I would like to see that community boards are advised, and that that an announcement or a memo is sent directly to the impacted community boards, in particular with respect to modifications of an application. You want to scroll down, Will? To the next highlighted area. Oh, okay. So section 205 is the comprehensive waterfront plan. And, I had some ambiguity about it being repealed. On the one hand, I kind of like the idea of a comprehensive plan, On the other hand, I also like there being a document that specifically addresses our waterfronts because of their importance and their continuing importance, which is, only going to increase. We now refer to our waterways as the sixth borough, if you will. And so, although the whole point of this document is to have a citywide comprehensive plan, I'm not sure that we should repeal having specifically a comprehensive waterfront plan. So, so that's for us to decide and talk about. I think that's it. Can you scroll down? I think that's it. Yeah, I think that's it. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, I'm sorry. So in this section, it talks about capital projects and looking at capital projects by districts and coming up with tables and information and cost about those projects. There isn't anything mentioned within this section that community boards should be sent this information as well. You know what, as a community board, we do on an annual basis rate capital projects in terms of what we want to see for our community. And I was a little disappointed that that there is a discussion in this section of doing a deep dive with respect to capital projects, but not conveying or communicating that information to community boards. I actually think that there ought to be a presentation and as well as a question and answer, a segment of that presentation to community boards. And I think that's it. You want to scroll down? Well, is that the end? Yeah, that's it. Okay, that's the end for me. And I think, are you next, Russell?
Yeah.
Okay.
You can see it?
Yeah.
Great.
So, okay, this first, I just wasn't sure what the purpose of this change was. And so for that reason, I wasn't sure kind of what to make of it. So this is continuing in the description of, capital plans and capital spending. Just pull up what I had here. And one of the things that's added is this requirement. Yeah, so yeah, this requirement on the community board to identify and basically compare expense and capital budget priorities and whether they were consistent with the district needs statements that have been provided in the past. And so it just wasn't clear to me why it would be necessary for us to add that information. Just check. charter section here that this is going into. Yeah, so this relates to the community board's statement of what its budget priorities are. So I guess there's a sort of, I mean, in general, I think I would just assume that, you know, a community board's budget priorities and statement of what its budget priorities are would be consistent with the previous, you know, district needs statement that the community boards have to provide. But if they're not, I don't know why a community board would need to necessarily flag that, or I guess sort of have to explain it. So I think that you know, it may be that to the extent that they're consistent, you know, that's certainly a point in favor of what the priorities are. I think to the extent that they're inconsistent, I guess that gives the community board an opportunity to explain the fact that its needs or priorities may have changed in a certain way, but ultimately, yeah, anyway, I was sort of ambivalent about this one. We can talk about why we think it's in here and whether we think it's necessary. So I just noted that. We can just scroll down. Yeah, so here, sorry, are we now on page? Let's try. I think I had other changes. Let's just scroll up.
Oh yeah, this is page 2 of 5. I was just looking for your comments, but
yeah, I thought I had. I thought I had written changes to. Oh, you know what? I guess the version that I sent you only reflects. It doesn't show the track changes.
oh,
Here, so let me share my screen because it'll
yeah,
show.
That's great.
Yeah.
Go for it. You can share now.
Okay, so this is the other change that I made that you couldn't see here. So it talks about the City Planning Commission is going to be submitting a report on its recommendations, or sorry, containing its comments on the 10-year capital strategy, and it provides for a public hearing, and it only provides for one public hearing. And one of the things that we had talked about in our last meeting was, in general, wanting to have more public meetings, and in particular, at least one public meeting in each community district. And so the change is to say at least one, so that, you know, potentially we could have more than one, and then also specifying that, you know, we would have one for each community district, not just one for the whole city, which I don't think is adequate. So that's the reason for that change. And then,
Hey, Russell,
yeah,
can you zoom in?
sure. Yeah, sorry, is it too? Well, I'm looking at it on a big screen, so it's me. So here,
okay, thank you for that.
Yeah. The other thing, I mean, I didn't make a comment about this, but one of the things that the changes do is they switch this stuff from being every 2 years to being every 5 years. That didn't really strike me as problematic, because I guess if you're going to be doing, you know, if the idea that it's really supposed to be a 10-year strategy, then I think, you know, redoing it every 2 years or reassessing it every 2 years, I think maybe too often. And I think to switch to 5 years seems fine to me. But again, here's the change that I talked about, where we're switching to at least one in each community district. Here, in terms of this provision and what they want to do with this, yeah, I think let's see. Yeah, this just seemed fine to me, and I just, you know, was observing that.
Mm-hmm.
Next, we've got, so here, this is a change that they're making to district need statements. And one of the changes that they're adding here is this provision that says that the district need statements have to be in a particular form that the mayor shall prescribe. And it seems to me, I mean, from what I gather, the purpose of that, I guess, would be to have some kind of standardization or something along those lines. And I can understand that impulse, but I don't think there should be a mandate on what the community district need statements have to look like. So I think, it's certainly possible for the mayor and the city to provide a sort of preferred template or something along those lines if they like it. And community boards can certainly use that, but I don't think it should be a requirement that boards have to use this form that the mayor would put out. For the rest of this, it talks about the addition of a survey. I think this stuff is fine. I think here, it wouldn't go in here because this is talking about, the need generally to do district need statements or whatever. It's not talking about a particular budget in a particular year. But broadly, and this is another issue that had come up last time, I think one of the concerns was, or one of the things we wanted to see was, to the extent that, we would be getting additional responsibilities essentially for community boards, and even frankly would like to see additional responsibilities for community boards. Mm-hmm. You also want to make sure that we're going to have the resources, right, to actually be able to do that stuff. And we're all volunteers and want to make sure that we have the support professionally, essentially, to be able to do these kinds of things. And so this struck me as another area where if we're going to have to be doing some kind of qualitative and quantitative survey, we might need support. Again, I don't think it requires sort of textual changes, but I think ultimately our resolution, if we have one, could talk about just the need for sufficient resources to actually do the kinds of things that we would potentially need to do under, the kind of planning that we're talking about. So scrolling down further. So here, we're talking about the comprehensive long-term plan and, basically the Board of Standards and Appeals having to respond. In general, with any reference of the comprehensive long-term plan here, I'm just noting that, our preference is that, we want the plans to be created by us, not to be some kind of a top-down comprehensive plan that we're dealing with here. Just pull up the charter provision briefly so I can see what we're dealing with. Yeah, this has to do with community board review of these variances at the BSA. And then I think that was it. That's all for my section.
If I could just add and to dovetail in terms of providing community boards with the necessary resources. One of the things that I was going to mention was that I'm going to read a sentence in the charter under city planning, which is section 191. And the title of section 191 is Department and Director of City Planning. And in number 5, it specifically says, provide community boards with such staff assistance and other professional and technical assistance as may be necessary to permit such boards to perform their planning duties and responsibilities under this chapter. So that's regarding the uniform land use procedure. And the reason why I wanted to raise that is because when we had the presentation from the city, we were told that the legislation, could not include anything financial with respect to the community boards, and that that would have to take place after this was codified by the city council. And so I did not see anything in this planning together draft legislation that addresses the need for community boards to have the professional and technical resources. However, I think that it is something that we should add overall.
Yeah, I think it's certainly something we can basically call for. I mean, I think it's, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure what part we would need to stick it in the charter, but I think it could certainly, you could have an amendment to the charter that says community boards need to have the resources that they require to do the things that they need to do. I think that's that could go in here as part of that legislation.
Mm-hmm. Is Michelle? Michelle? Okay.
Second, Sharon.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Michelle.
Okay. Yeah, I'll tell you, this is usually a reliable computer, but not only did the sound go, but my image is down. I had my camera on and the image isn't coming up. At any rate, we work with what we have. And thank you, Sharon, for your very kind words at the opening. So, yeah, so my thing was page 5 through 10. So are we on 5 now? Is this 5?
Can you guys see the screen?
Yep.
Yeah, this is page 5.
Yes.
Okay. I had done the highlights in red, so I was just strange to see it in blue. I guess it just converted itself when it went to you, but that's okay. So let me just make a couple of general remarks. A few things that, of course, the premise of this plan is of tremendous concern to me. I'm not sure what we can do about it, but I know it is getting a lot of pushbacks from the major city agencies, so like city planning. So to that extent, maybe we would have some support in some of the basic changes that we would request. But it's very concerning to me for a couple of reasons. Not only the top down, which would start with a borough steering committee that is represented by all appointees, but also because of the premise. What they are trying to do, because there's a board, and I think I've said this before, but I think it bears repeating. Once you're looking at the city comprehensively, because they're using that word, they're necessarily asking that each community board give suggestions, but basically yield to the overall plan, if I'm making myself clear. In other words, once there's an overall plan, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to just talk about community district by community district and have a plan. They may be asking for some community districts to make decisions that would bear directly on other community districts. And I could see that happening here. To me, this borough, it's basically a power play. I don't see how it really coincides with the previous philosophy, which to have community planning. That was really what Scott Stringer had wanted, and what a lot of what Gail Brewer was really talking about was community-based planning. I don't see that this is really going to be possible here. And it's disturbing to me also that nowhere in this document is the mention of 197A plans. And I think that at least it should be in there, where they acknowledge it in some way, or they encourage the community to use it, or some reference to it. But it is a method for a community to have a significant role in its own destiny, and it's the one thing it's completely left out of the plan. So that's of concern to me. And also the constant reference to the director. When you look through here, it's the director will then do this, and then the director will do that, and the director will do this. And that to me is very disturbing. So having said that, we were all tasked with changing either the wording or the concept as it applies to this plan, which is given to us. But I'm not buying this plan. But I did make a lot of suggestions. And of course, the change in the wording would have to be consistent to the plan if it was agreed to. But it's by no means it's by no means will hold up as a legal document in its current form with my current corrections anyway. But they are suggestions. I would like to see the steering committee basically eliminated. I don't know that I had an opportunity to basically say that in here. And I would like the steering committee to be the borough board, because the borough board is the representation of all of the community board chairs. And to me, that's the way to do it. We are so far down on the totem pole here that to me, this is a power grab. I'm very suspicious of this. Maybe I'm the only one, but to me, this is like a wolf in sheep's clothing. I think that no matter how we dance with the current wording, I'm not sure it's going to come out the way we want it if we're working with this document. But maybe we can find a way as a preamble to this document to make very basic suggestions as to basic conceptual changes that we would like to see, assuming others feel like I do, that they'd like to see some conceptual changes. I really would. So anyway, with that, I'll go through the pages. And if you look at number 2 here, I took out the word director and I put in community board. In the next line, I took out sustainability plan because I don't know what that means. That word either can be used generally or it can be referring very specifically to whatever the writers of this decided sustainability means. I do not understand that word. I don't know what it means in terms of all of the subdivisions and categories that they're referring to. So I just said updated long-term plan. I need a definition of that word. And again, as you scroll down to line 8, again, I substituted community board for director. A list of policies program, look at line 9. I said the city might seek to implement or undertake the goals in no later than 20 years. I did not deal with the dates because just by the way they presented the plan, it starts in 2015. So already the dates are, not applicable. But I didn't particularly weigh in on whether we want something in 5 years or 4 years or 10 years. I'm fine with that to be up for discussion or left as it is. Will, if you can scroll a little more, maybe we'll get. Again, we get down to line 23, and as you see, I wrote city agencies as opposed to the director. I'm very worried about that director. I don't quite know what he's all about. And again, on the next page, line 2, I replaced director with agencies. And in line 6, I said that the comprehensive long-term plan, and also consider any alternative plan presented by a community board. If you could scroll down. Line 10, again, it tries to give the community board more input, draft a comprehensive long-term plan for the community board to have additional commentary. I got the feeling, throughout the document that the community board gets an opportunity to comment once, in this part of the process, and maybe another time in another part of the process. I never really get the feeling that we're in on the ground floor, which is, I think we probably all agree about that. If you could scroll down. Okay, we get to line 19. They're talking about the land use scenario for each community district. I wanted to affirm that it would be as per the community board's proposal. In line 20, each land use scenario for each community district by such date, the community board, again, crossed out the director, shall select a preferred land use scenario for its district. And this shall be accompanied by a written narrative describing the community boards and the director's selection process. I put it in quotes because, again, I didn't know what other word to put in there, but I'm worried about the director. Page 7. Again, line 2, thereafter the director, and here I just joined the community boards to the director because I thought if we can't eliminate him or her, maybe we can work with that person. So the director and community board shall submit to the speaker. And then again, line 5, the land use scenario as proposed by the community district and adopted by the council for each community district. Going down to line 8, again, I eliminated the director for each community district, that would be the selection. The director shall consider all public feedback and partner with the community district in producing the final plan. I may not have been as consistent on every line with removing the word director, but it's whoever that word is going, whatever we're going to substitute for that. Scroll down to line 16, please. So line 16, the impact statement and its findings, it says to establish actions. I said, unless there are proposed changes to the zoning resolution needed for a given project to come to fruition. I want to be very sure that if that were the case, that it would go through the usual process and not be usurped by the power of this particular document. Line 19 eliminates the sustainability changes, the recommendations pursuant to section 17 by veering from the community district's recommendation by more than 10%. The director again shall produce an amendment to the comprehensive long-term plan. To me, that should be the community board. Again, line 23. I mean, I recognize here that there has to be one person or one panel to whom we have to either address or work with. I'm not trying to eliminate that. I'm just not happy with the vehicle that this document proposes. Page 8. Again, public meeting in each borough and with the impacted community board on the updated plan. And then I eliminated in line 4, any accounts review of the per paragraph 3 of this document. I took that out. I have to refer back to paragraph 3 now to figure out why. It probably has to do with it not addressing the community board in that section. Line 9, again, director, and the speaker of the city council, and the long-term planning. Now I made comma, I eliminated and the long-term planning committee and the community boards. I added them in again. I'm hoping the long-term planning committee is the borough board and not this so-called steering committee. Line 16. The city progress made to implement or undertake policies, programs, and actions, including the community district recommendations, included, again, that word sustainability. I think we need somebody to define that for us. Page 9. Again, it's a lot of the advisory board. All these pages, as you are aware now, have to do with structure. You know, so it's all about the steering committee, the community boards, and all that stuff. So in line 6, again, I added along with the community board chairs, and that's sort of my reference to a possible borough board involvement. Line 15, the steering committee, this I included. The steering committee should include representatives of the borough board appointed by the borough president for each community board. That implication, I don't think the wording came out as I meant it. The members of the community board are appointed by the borough president. The community board appoints their chair. So to that extent, it would be the community board chairs, but everybody is appointed by the borough president. So that's good. And then on lines 18 and 19, I didn't know what that meant. I mean, I eliminated it. I don't see that it's pertinent to the document. And I think that it requires a judgment call that we don't necessarily know who's making that decision. And what do they mean unrepresented in planning and land use decision-making process? It's like calling for the inexperienced or advocating for the inexperienced. I don't see that we need it as a blanket statement. I think that on a case-by-case basis, on an appointment-by-appointment basis, that anybody under consideration, there would be some logical reason for a choice. And I don't think that a guideline like this is necessary in the decision-making process, no matter who makes the decision, whether we end up having the steering committee or if it's the borough board or if it's the mayor or whoever it is. The judgment should be made about the individual as an applicant, you know, on that, and the best person should be chosen in the eyes of those making the appointment. Page 10.
I'll just note, it's talking about underrepresented groups, not you know, inexperienced individuals.
Yeah, I was about to say that myself, because underrepresented groups is not synonymous with inexperience.
No, but even in that case, I think that's sort of a call that they're going to have to make at the time. And I think that when you're interviewing, that all comes into play. I don't know why it has to be in the document. To me, those are logical. I mean, it's logical, but at any rate, again, the steering committee, along with community boards, establish citywide vision, I think is better than targets. Line 11, adopt community district level recommendations for any category in accordance with the citywide vision. And then if you go down to the rest of page 10, Again, line 17, I've inserted with community boards everywhere I could. Borough steering, line 19, and community board representatives as an addition. Line 22, and community boards and the borough's steering committee. But I took out steering because I'm hoping it's going to be the borough board. And that was the extent of my directive.
Thank you so much for that, Michelle. And you know what, maybe at this time we should open it up to anyone else that has any overall general comments. Mrs. Brown?
Do you have her hand up? I'm not seeing it.
Oh, wait a minute. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. That was my mouse. Sorry.
Just a
about that.
reminder for anybody, if it's one of your first times at our meetings, use the raise hand feature found under reactions at the bottom of your screen, or if you're using an older version of Zoom, it is under the participants, or if you're calling in, it's *9 to raise your hand. So Felice and Peter Patch have their hands up.
Yeah, Felice.
Oh, sorry. So I'd just like to thank everybody who put so much work into this. I signed up, I signed in a little late to the meeting, but really a lot of hard work went into this, and I think it's a really good approach. Minor issue, stuff that's in brackets is proposed to be deleted in the legislation, and underlined is proposed to be new stuff.
Yes.
Not necessarily obvious to everybody. But especially in light of the blood center development, and someone, could put into this the proposal for, there needs to be life sciences, and this is the perfect place to put it. I think strengthening the role of the community boards is a great approach. I like the concept that this is more of a planning and visioning document that is comprehensive for the city, but is not here's what it means in terms of development, and we're going to pre-authorize development to be taking place without a more thoughtful role. So I just overall, I wanted to really thank the folks who put so much effort into trying to redraft this and rethink about it and strengthen the role for the community and the community boards.
Okay. Thank you, Felice. Peter?
Thank you. I like what you said, Felice. I like very much what Michelle said. But I have to say at the same time, while I about 1,000% agree with everything Michelle said, it does give me pause to imagine 50 community boards trying to get the attention of this, director of planning, which one community board member who will remain nameless called a czar. I think that's probably at least a good way to think of it. And, in relation to the contentious projects that we've seen over the last few years, I'm thinking of the waste transfer station, I'm thinking of the blood center, I'm thinking of the Northwell Hospital. I guess I don't have a perfect crystal ball, but my crystal ball or magic ball or whatever it is saying it's about a 99% certainty that the czar would approve all of those and that we would have less voice. So I remain very concerned about the whole conception and the concentration of power in that, that decision maker. And if a version, even an amended version, I very much like all of the edits that have been proposed were adopted. I think, I think we could continue to have our meetings and we could, go out and protest in the street by the blood center, but I think it would have less, if any, sort of impact on the planning czar. Thank you.
Paul?
Good evening, everybody. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you, Paul.
Okay, thank you. I just want to say, obviously, I came and presented this in front of the board several months ago, and this task force seems to be sort of an outgrowth of the discussion that was engendered from that. And, you know, it's great to see you guys working on this. I just want to say, you know, my biggest concern listening to the discussion is, and I don't want to exactly parrot what Peter's saying, but, you know, for example, Michelle, you said something really smart, which was that, you know, this should be vision instead of target. Well, they use the word target for a reason. They're using the word target because that's how they're going to come up with the numbers or the figures that they're going to do in order to come up with their particular, you know, community board by community board targets. So I think that the reason they're using that, you know, language is very specific, obviously, and language isn't by accident. So again, my concern is, and this is why most of the other community boards that I presented to, they just rejected this outright, because to me, it doesn't seem like it's a bill that can be fixed. And I even think that looking at the language, and again, I understand what you're doing, and I think it's great that you're discussing it and going over it. But my biggest concern is coming in. This is the goal or the agenda, or it seems to me the agenda of the speaker is to get this quote unquote feedback, and I don't believe much of it will be actually placed into a modified bill, or if it is, it'll be window dressing at best. So my bigger concern is, and remains, and again, if you saw me present at the previous meetings, is that, echoing what Michelle and Peter said, that this bill is not going to be modified in the way that you want it to be modified. At the end of the day, even if modifications are made, the meat of the bill and the intent of the bill changed, and the power structure won't. And that is my concern.
Okay. Paul?
I think you're just everything, but you know, those are just my concerns, and I wanted to bring them up again. So thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much for that. Before we
Sure.
get to Michelle, because we already heard from Michelle, we just want to hear from some other people who haven't spoken. Evelyn David.
Yes, good evening, everybody. I didn't know that I would even understand what is going on, but the one thing that I've been saying lately to people who are telling me don't be so concerned, it is what it is, I keep saying the community boards work really hard on projects that come up, things that happen in our community, right? And I'm not going to go into examples we know, like the bicycle lanes, et cetera. Anyway, all this discussion that goes on and on and on, and then we find out that the decision was made months and months ago. So what everybody's saying, that they are worried that this document will just go through and nobody will pay attention to the changes that you are so tediously and wonderfully working on, line by line and word by word. You are completely on the ball. This is totally correct, okay, to make this document so that the city will actually pay attention to what the community board is saying. The community board represents the community, and the people in the community have voices. So now, you know, then we will be more represented in the council. Now, if their intent, so my whole question is, this document, is this going to be voted on by the city council? Does it go through a review process? everybody, all the comments come in from the community boards and then the council will look at it carefully? Or will they just say, oh, that's my question.
So
Their comments here, they're worried that nobody's going to pay attention. So that's my question. Legally, technically, right, where does it go after the community board has finished with their comments?
Yeah, sure.
How do we make the council responsive to what the community board is saying? That's my question.
Mm-hmm. So right now, I think we're still out to lunch on that. They are expecting feedback from community boards. We hope they will consider that feedback. We're not sure. Certainly based on the content of the document, of the draft legislation itself, it gives us pause and concern overall. But our task is to provide feedback. And what I'm thinking is, Michelle, I do see your hand. What I'm thinking is that we might want to begin to set some parameters in terms of our overall recommendations. And Will, if you could unmute.
Before we go to Michelle,
Yes.
I want to add to that.
Okay.
So yeah, I think as Sharon rightly said, we're in a feedback process. What the council has said is that they want to take feedback from the community boards and from the community generally and everything like that, and that they're going to incorporate that in there. And so we hope that that's the case. Obviously, to the extent, I would hope that they would also have additional hearings after having gotten the feedback from everybody. And so then at that point, there's potentially also an opportunity for folks to go to hearings to provide additional comments there. But I mean, the hope is, they've said they want this feedback. The hope is that they will actually incorporate it. And in terms of, beyond that, what the sort of legislative process will be or what the timeline is going to be, we don't really know specifically. What they've said is that they're going to be taking feedback at least through June because they're still making presentations and things along that line, those lines. So, so that's sort of the timing of it. I think in terms of what they need to consider or what have you, I mean, I think our feedback can basically take whatever form we like. I think, I would say, I think we talked a little bit about this. I mean, we've been going through this in a very sort of detailed way to just try and get a full kind of understanding of what's in here and make sure that, we know really sort of what it is that we're dealing with. I would say in light of the breadth and the degree to which I think ultimately what our comments are and the views that I think we're expressing here are, I think it basically sort of goes beyond, just line edits and that kind of thing, because, there are pretty big, I would say, kind of changes to the approach that we're sort of asking for. And so from that perspective, I think it's very useful to have gone through the various specific provisions of the policy. But I think in terms of what we actually provide, I think it can be in the form of sort of broad commentary and points essentially that we want to see about, what kinds of, just the sort of how this kind of planning would go about and what the role of the board would be and things of that nature. I mean, I think we can incorporate, maybe we'll incorporate some specific line edits, but I think broadly speaking, we can send a resolution, for example, that just sort of sets out what it is we want to see, and we don't necessarily have to send the line edits specifically to the council, because I don't think we're going to be able to completely. I think to actually implement everything we've said, I think we would have to rewrite the whole thing. I don't think we want to do that.
Yeah, I think you have hit the nail right on the head. We've done the deep dive now. We can zoom out and really take a look at some general overall points. And Michelle has mentioned a couple of them already. For example, elimination of the steering committee and putting a greater focus on the borough boards. For example, another would be a greater emphasis on and also including 197A plans, and also making sure that we include a recommendation that community boards be given the resources to conduct real community-based planning. And so, you know, overall, I think we can zoom out and really list some of the main points that speak to the deficiencies of the document overall. And also being cognizant of the fact that we did we did have a vote. Peter Patch suggested a resolution, and there was agreement that if our recommendations were not acceptable, that we were going to oppose it. And so I think overall we have to make sure that we frame our ask, if you will, in such a way that we know that it's doable, it's actionable, it is something that is achievable, or else, you know, at the end, we're going to have to completely oppose it. I see a number of hands, and I know that Michelle is waiting. So Michelle, Will, do you want to take Michelle off of mute? And then it's Barbara and Tiana and Mrs. Brown.
Go ahead, Michelle. You can unmute. Michelle.
Yes,
Michelle?
can you hear me?
Yeah,
we can hear you now,
I'm
Michelle.
sorry, I don't know what's going on. When I hit unmute, it didn't take. Anyway, okay, here I am. Yes, absolutely in agreement with Russell and with Sharon. That was the point I was going to make. We will also, I think, have the opportunity, or at least create an opportunity for ourselves to have multiple resolutions, depending on where in the process this is. At the moment, to address Paul's concerns and his presentation, I think that we are inclined to turn this down as is. And I think including the broad points that we were able to make because we reviewed the document so carefully, and because we now fully recognize the real pitfalls, and we can address some of the words used, I think we should have a resolution tonight, but it should be including those broad points, what we feel this document is lacking, why we won't support it. And there's I'm very pleased that we went through it word by word, because it'll serve us well in the future as we may want to formulate other resolutions. But in addition, it gave us a better understanding. And when I had to I, for one, I'm sure for others, when I had to actually look at the words like target, and I thought, I'm worried about that word, you know, and the director and sustainability. We still need those things defined. So, I agree with everything the chair said. And that's my hope for tonight, that we come out with a resolution in opposition with all of the broad points that we mentioned tonight. And we'll have other resolutions in the future. We're going to continue to meet on this.
So in terms of process, just a quick question, Michelle, do you see it as one resolution this evening? Or do you see it as a couple of different resolutions? For example, one just outright rejecting the draft legislation, and another resolution, listing the changes we should have, or do you think it should be combined?
However, whatever you think is easiest for our target to understand and to read. I think for tonight, we should not go through the line by line.
Right.
So for tonight, we can, if everybody wants to, have a resolution that says we turn this down as presented. And then in a separate resolution, our suggestions for reconfiguring this document. Or if you wanted to put all that in, be it further resolved, and you feel that it's easy to read and to understand, and we want to get it into one resolution, that's fine.
Okay. All right. Let's hear from some other.
I want to just, I think my preference would be to have one resolution and basically have it say, here's what we want to come out of it, or, here are the changes that we want. But then essentially also incorporating the point that Peter had made that we talked about last time and voted on last time, saying, in the absence of these changes, we don't support the current version. I think that's a way to just sort of combine the two.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Yeah. Barbara Rutter.
Hi. First of all, I missed the first meeting and I'm very impressed with what everybody is doing. And I will say I agree with the last thing Russell said and so on. I have a question. Would there be more power if we combine with other community boards? I'm afraid that we may say something and somebody else may say something slightly different. I don't believe that any community board would want to give up their power. So I think that maybe the general flow would be an agreement. But even if we pick 3 community boards, 6, 7, 8, or something like that, and say, can we have something in unison to give less flexibility?
Russell, has there been a borough board meeting since the introduction of this draft legislation? Has there been any talk about it?
We haven't really discussed it very much in the borough board. I mean, there's been mention of it and the fact that community boards are looking at it and things like that, and the fact that community boards have concerns about it. But the borough board hasn't, really. As a borough board, as opposed to hearing reports from what the community boards are doing, looked at it as an item. Although I think we could still do that. I think basically in terms of what the timing is, maybe that's something that the borough board can do at the June meeting, with the benefit of, resolutions and work that other community boards have done. I mean, my guess is, and I think in terms of, my recollection is I think some community boards have just said no. I think some of them have had more specific suggestions. I mean, I think my guess is that at the borough board level, basically there's probably things that all the community boards would sort of broadly agree on in terms of what their feedback is on the proposal, and maybe there could be like a united kind of resolution coming out of the borough board. Or even like a sort of new resolution from the borough board. And when I say new, I mean a resolution that sort of raises new issues that could then be also sent to the various community boards to sort of consider. But yeah, that hasn't happened yet. I think it certainly could.
Taina, then Mrs. Brown, and Wendy.
Thank you. I just want to echo what Russell said in terms of, I personally would not be in support of us just putting out just a blanket resolution opposing this. Frankly, I would not have joined this task force if we were going to spend all this time talking about how we could make this better just to reject it outright. Frankly, I think as a board, we do this way too often. We just reject things left and right. I think there's an opportunity. This is not a perfect document. This is clearly, and we see a lot of issues with it, right? And I thought Michelle had some great suggestions of questions we have or things we want to change. I think the question of what this director is and who they are and what kind of sort of unilateral power they have is important. And I think in going through the document line by line, we can come up with themes of changes that we want. And I like what Peter said and what Russell echoed, which is we can state like sort of this is what we believe needs to be changed in order for this document, for this proposal to be palpable for us, right? And should we not see enough changes, that we're requesting being met, then we would oppose it. But I'm really opposed to just flat out opposing it without just us first really just giving just thoughtful feedback, right? Like, to me, that was the purpose of this group. The purpose of, it's the opportunity that I think we have right now is to be constructive and give thoughtful, specific feedback about what we see as lacking to make this a better thing, as opposed to just saying, hey, we hate this. Frankly, like, that's just, I think, a cop-out for us to do that. And it's an easy way for the council and the speaker's office and everyone to just write us off. Then it's like, okay, well, they just opposed it, right? So then there's nothing for them to listen to. So that's my 2 cents.
That's a good point. Thank you for that. Mrs. Brown?
Good evening, everyone. My compliments to the chairs for your hard work and everyone else who participated in the edits. I support one resolution with the consideration and the incorporation of Peter and Michelle's comments. I think this is the best way to go. I think this is the most effective way to go. And thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Brown.
You're welcome.
Wendy, then Peter and Elliot. Wendy?
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. It's kind of a Mercury retrograde thing. I kept hitting unmute, but it wouldn't unmute. Anyway, I want to thank you all for the tremendous work that you put in. It really shows. Michelle, you were talking about the word director, and I so agree with you that every word has another meaning and another implication. And maybe for director, another word might be administrator or locally appointed administrator, or some other word other than director, because I think director takes on another meaning. So now that that's sort of a very local, micro comment, I wanted to step back and say that this proposal, just by its very nature, takes control away from local boards and local communities. And local boards and local communities, I mean, the boards were really created so that the community would have a voice. And the reason some opine that governments are created altogether is to fight big interests like, large overlords, and we were merely the serfs. And in this case, large business interests. I think I said this at a prior meeting that I had a wonderful law professor, Manasi Haile, who was a diplomat from Ethiopia. And he said that one of the strengths of a government is to have bureaucracy because it gives time and consideration for justice to come forth. I think that's a really important consideration. This is something that attempts to streamline a process, and in doing that takes away layers of information. So I'm just going to be very pedantic and add that I had another wonderful professor at college who won the Nobel Prize for discovering hepatitis B. And he said, every time you summarize, you take away layers of information. And that's what I think is happening in the intent of this bill on the part of Corey Johnson, is that, you get three kind of general proposals. There's sort of a centralized unit that gets to set forth the priorities. I think it's very appropriate for cities to have some kind of planning as to health, safety, and welfare of its communities, and that there may be different geopolitical considerations. We have coastline, we have some inland, we have some forestry, there's all kinds of concerns of that nature. Many of you know I tend to testify on environmental concerns, and I still am very concerned about this. There's really nothing in here that talks to that, which is a really proper way for the city to coordinate its efforts. But to have a politician who does not after election have to be responsive to the electorate, being able to dictate, well, I want there to be this kind of a hub or that kind of an industry, and I'm going to plop it here, takes away, has the great potential to take away our ability to uphold zoning, which is a hard fought battle anywhere. We are the second in the United States to put forth zoning regulations, which came about in 1916 as a response to the equitable building downtown, which cut off light to community neighboring buildings, cementing over windows to build a very tall building. These are issues that actually are relevant today. This document takes away that kind of control and also begins to break down zoning. And that's a really important issue. So if we were going to actually redraft this, like have at it, you poor guys. If I can do something to help, I will. But it really would change the tenor of it, like on a 180, to give control back to the communities totally, to respect zoning and to create, as you know, I'm all for the 210 height cap on the avenues, 75 to be respected on the inner block, to give much greater voting role, not just advisory, to the local community boards. So, fundamentally, I think that it's good to have a bureaucracy because there's going to be pushback on the part of people who stand to make a lot of money when this bill goes through, if this bill goes through. And we need to be able to have a mechanism of bureaucracy that protects us so that we can make some fair decisions. There should be development. I'm really not against development. I think that there even could be a blood center and a hub, but not the way it was proposed. We need to retain that control. Thanks for letting me go on so long.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for that, Wendy. I see that there are 2 more hands. And if it's okay with Russell, maybe we should start talking about a single resolution, because that appears to be the overall consensus, and then maybe start thinking about some of the whereases that we might be able to incorporate. So we'll take.
I mean, I have ideas about the resolution. We can take some more comments, but I've been sort of just writing down, I think, what.
Okay.
Just based on notes about, kind of what the commentary has been and maybe summarizing it, but we can take some more comments first and then.
Perfect.
We can tell folks what, yeah.
Okay. So Peter Patch and then Michelle.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, I'm looking for you who were just speaking. I like it every time you talk. So thank you for Wendy, thank you for your contribution.
Yes. Thank you, Wendy.
I think we need to, I'm entirely okay with what's being described, subject to one thing that I think is really important. The first sentence should be, we oppose this, unless, and let me just speak briefly to that. I think we have to recognize the fundamental premise of this approach is to create, and I think the right term is a planning czar. As Wendy just described, one of the things it's going to do is break down and reduce the role of zoning, because the planning czar can in effect overrule zoning and say it's consistent with the plan. I think it is, we've said consistently that everything about this will reduce the role and the influence of the community board. And it is really turning the whole lot, much as I like it, it's turning the whole logic of this process upside down to have it driven by community boards rather than by, sort of a top-down hierarchy. So, unless you want a planning czar, I think we need to make it very explicit that where we're coming from with the fundamental premise is opposition. And then we can specify, because I liked everything that was said about the, changing the steering committee to the borough board, incorporating 97A plans, et cetera. I'd like to add one other thing though. And this came up in our last session. I actually think this is rushed. And one of the indicators that it's rushed, apart from all the concerns and caveats we already have, as someone, it might have been Michelle, pointed out last session, they're creating, I'm going to use an analogy, they're creating a Supreme Court of planning, headed up by the Chief Justice who's going to have the final word. It's going to be the czar. They have not even provided for term limits for that. So as currently provided, once that planning committee is created, unless this thing is amended, we have life tenure for those appointed people, because they didn't even bother to think about whether there should be, tenure, term limits, et cetera. So I do think that as currently this drafted, it is fatally flawed. I absolutely agree with our caveats and our concerns. to be honest, I think it is a snowball's chance in Hades. That's, you know, the warm place. You know, that our list of 5 changes, which fundamentally change the premise of the whole thing, like disbanding the steering committee and having the borough board. Much as I like that, I think the chances of that change are less than 0. So I just strongly urge you all to consider that we become very clear, because if we have 5 or 7 caveats, and if you don't do everything we like, we're gonna not like this and oppose it. I think that phrasing of the resolution will be totally lost and frankly totally dismissed. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. Good points. Michelle, can you unmute Michelle?
Yeah, good point, Peter. What I was going to say is to make no mistake, this plan is a direct attack on the zoning resolution. That is what this is all about. That's why they have come up with this plan, because the only thing that's stopping any project anywhere is the zoning. So make no mistake about that. And I think that somewhere in our resolution, we have to acknowledge that we believe that to be true. I'm not afraid to oppose because they may or may not listen to us. Our job is to ask. I don't think we should not ask because we're afraid we'll sound unreasonable. We're afraid that we're not going to sound agreeable or friendly or anything like that. To my mind, that's not relevant. I think we need to make our points. We need to ask for what we want. This will be a general resolution. I think that is the way to go. And in terms with getting the borough board on board, maybe we can ask community boards, once we have our resolution, to sign on to our resolution. Some may not. And those that may not may simply want to write their own. We've done that. We've had other community boards ask us to sign on to their resolution. And while we agreed with them in principle, we'd just rather write our own. That's fine. But I think once we have something down, we really should send it to the other boards and ask them to sign on to it. And also make it clear that that's not necessarily our final resolution, that we plan to have additional input. So I think we're on the right path. You know, yes. I think doing things on the right path, but I wouldn't be timid about it.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, Will. Go ahead, Will.
It's Russell, but yeah, so
I'm sorry.
That's okay. So for the, I think basically, you know, I agree with everything that everybody said, but and in terms of what Michelle has just said, I think basically if, you know, at the end of this, they haven't made the changes that we want, and I fully accept the fact that I think, you know, to get all the stuff that we've asked for is a long shot, and I think we are talking about big changes in terms of the whole approach of this, but I think we should put ourselves out there and on record as saying this is what we really want, and asking for that from the city. And if they turn us down, which they may well do, we're still no less able to just say no to, you know, what comes back in terms of what they've changed or not, having received the, you know, the feedback that the city has provided in the last several months of this. So, I mean, I've been writing down what I think are kind of basically the sort of comments that I think we would have, or things that we've been talking about. So,
can I propose a resolution?
Yeah, well, let me just run through some of these things, and then I think we can do that. So the first, just to kind of summarize what I think the overall kind of commentary has been. I think if we were going to do, you know, first of all, you know, we oppose the plan as currently drafted, and, you know, don't want to support it except with the following, you know, changes. The director of long-term planning, we want that, you know, the appointment to be changed. We don't want it to be a mayoral only appointment. And then maybe we also want to specify in particular a method of doing it, such as, being appointed by the borough presidents, but certainly we want to say that we don't like having it just be a mayor only appointee. I think there are concerns about the long-term planning steering committee. Well, so there's a long-term planning steering committee in the bill, which is a citywide committee, and then there are borough steering committees, which are borough level. I think we want the borough steering committees to be replaced by the borough boards. I'm not sure what what to do about the long-term planning steering committee. It's a citywide committee, but I think it sounds like we want some changes there. So I think that would be one of the provisions if we sort of figure out what specifically we might want. Again, borough steering committee replaced by borough boards. Land use scenario for each community district chosen by the community board for that district. Landmarks and public safety added as subjects to be considered in creating the community district plans. No citywide targets except with respect to resiliency, infrastructure, environmental sustainability, and sanitation, which are the things that we talked about last time. Community district land use scenario targets should be set by the community board, except with respect to those items we just talked about. Community boards need resources and should be given resources to do their own planning in their district and to provide the quantitative and qualitative surveys provided for in the district needs statements. And then anytime there are hearings, public hearings provided for, there should be at least one in each community district. So
I would add, Will, something about the 197A plans. That we should elevate them or make sure that community boards have the resources to conduct their own community-based planning through the development of a 197A for their district.
Okay.
Am I unmuted? I think I am.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, can I just say that I think one of the initial lines should be, we fundamentally oppose it as drafted and structured, because our very big issue is the structure of all of this. So I think we should mention that. And I think we should highlight zoning as a priority in the resolution. You see, I'm very concerned about this, and I do want some definitions of some of the words. And one thing that highlighted this for me in the discussion, well, I listened to that 7-hour hearing with the city planning. And one of the very big concerns, and it is for me too, is what one lady from a single home, zone district in Queens said, that their main concern is this equity of density. They are very, very worried that their communities are going to be rezoned so that multiple dwellings can be put there. And I have no doubt that that kind of thing is on the forefront of the thinking for this. And people who've made those investments in private homes, you've got a good portion of Queens like that. You've got Staten Island like that. You've got, well, parts of Brooklyn, everywhere. So that's why I think we have to stress some respect for zoning, that the changes to the zoning resolution should not be made lightly. I realize we can't say we want no changes to the zoning resolution. Speaking, some of us are more preservationists than others, but in a realistic way, that they can't use zoning to flip this around, even for transportation hubs, even for manufacturing, or putting it in an area which is otherwise, small business. I could just see all that manipulation all over the city, which will really serve to, in many cases, destroy what those communities have built in a fundamental way. So I'm worried about that. And I would just like that view to be somewhere in this resolution, that we want it to be used for good.
Well, yeah, I think that's consistent with, I mean, I don't think we have to take a position one way or another on what other districts are going to do or what they might want, but I think what we're basically saying, I mean, what I would suggest that we say is, you know, if each community district is ultimately going to decide its own land use scenario, which is what we want and what we're calling for, then that's going to give the community boards the ability basically to specify changes or not that they want or don't. So I think if a community board is happy with, you know, the current zoning that it has, then it can adopt a land use scenario that doesn't make any changes. And if there are some changes that people do want, they can, you know, the community board can incorporate those. But basically, I think that, well, I don't know. I think if we say that we want the community board to be the one to pick the land use scenario for each district, I think that encompasses, you know, the stuff you've talked about in terms of not imposing things on, you know, various different other community districts around the city that may have different kinds of zoning, and also not, you know, imposing zoning that you know, the local district doesn't want.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, Billy is next, and we have a caller on the line as well. But I did want to mention that the zoning, I want to mention that I actually don't think that this is an attack on a zoning resolution. It's more of an attack on community boards overall. But more specifically with respect to the zoning resolution, it is a living, breathing document. I do support the idea of updates and changes that should occur, can occur as the city transforms. So this is what we have now is not the same document that was first codified in 1916, for example. And we should expect that as the city grows and moves in a different direction, because the city itself, you know, and you know, there are people that study the urban environment as an organism in a sense, and it only suggests that the city itself is a living, breathing entity, if you will, but not to stray too far afield on that, but just to emphasize that we'll need to have some flexibility, certainly with the zoning resolution, because the city itself grows and changes in a number of ways. So Billy is next. Will, if you wouldn't mind unmuting Billy, and then we have a caller as well.
I'm probably not going to vote on this tonight because I did just arrive, and I know that is kind of rude. I was just, as I joined, listening to Russell speak a little bit about, and I wasn't sure if this is what a resolution might include or not, so forgive me. But on the targets, you mentioned, I think, you know, resiliency or sustainability. I wasn't sure whether housing, affordable housing, is in what we're contemplating thinking should be targeted.
I think the idea is that would be set at the community level by the community boards and picking the community district, you know, and picking the land use scenario for each community district. Community boards would set those targets for their own districts rather than have it be done at a citywide level. And I think the thinking is basically, you know, to take our own community district as an example, you know, well, yeah, just to sort of back up here, I think the idea with the citywide targets and the items that we were sort of talking about for those, you know, those I think are areas where there was some recognition of the fact that you need to have some kind of city guidance because, you know, you sort of couldn't rely potentially on community board level decisions that are going to get you what you need in that regard. But we basically felt like in all other areas, doing it at the community board level was going to be enough. And, to take an example like affordable housing, which, I think we all feel is very deeply needed. We've always identified that very, very consistently as being one of the top needs for this district and for Community Board 8. And so basically our thinking was, given the fact that I think there's a broad awareness, including within particular community districts, that there is a need for affordable housing, that actually if you do rely on a community board to set that kind of a target for its own district, you're still going to get affordable housing and be able to get affordable housing that you need that way. So the idea was to do that at a sort of local level.
Okay, and then that sounds good to me. And then are we, I assume we're including something about giving the community boards, right, the resources, the land use expertise, the money, et cetera, to craft their own plans?
Yes.
Yes.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then I guess the last thing is I just wasn't sure where you were going with your comment on, what other boroughs are thinking about and the sort of single family zoning perhaps being targeted by this. But to the extent that my opinion matters, I would say we should not weigh in on single family zoning. And I don't think that's what Michelle was suggesting, but just I wanted to be clear that, I think in the spirit of this, every community should weigh in as they see appropriate, but I don't think our rendering a judgment on whether single family zoning should be eliminated is something we should do. Okay,
yeah, I don't think we need to.
Yeah.
That was my basically response to Michelle, was to say that I think, to the extent that places that have it want it or whatever, that's going to be up to them. And our resolution doesn't say anything one way or another on what other districts need to do.
Okay, great. And sorry I couldn't join earlier. I had another obligation. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you, Billy. Will we have a caller?
Yeah, the phone number ending with 485. You can hit *6 to unmute, and just identify yourself so that we can.
Hi, this is me, Marco Tamayo. I'm sorry, I have problems in my computer. First of all, let me be very clear. Nobody came to our community board and tell us what to do. We are doing our job. And this is not the first time that we do task force. So that has to be very clear. My point tonight is if this resolution is on the floor and somebody call, I will oppose, because I need to read exactly what are the terms of these resolutions very careful. And we are not in the process to be in a hurry like your process that we have to make a decision right away. This is one point. The other point, yes, Michelle, she's right. They're targeting this on resolution. That's what it is. This is the enforcement of the goals of planning. And planning, obviously, they have the only tool to organize the city, the zoning resolution. And we have to be more careful, and our discussion, we have to be oriented is what is the input of the community? Not if it's resilient or affordable housing. No, we are not discussing that. What we're discussing is what is the input, what is the role in the community board, or the community have more strong participation in the process of planning. That's what it is, our concern. We are not discussing if it's affordable housing, if it's density. No, we're not discussing that. What we have to be very careful is how we're going to handle the decisions from the community board and how the position of the community board will be reflected in the plan. And that is what it is. We don't need to put more power, or I'm sorry, I had to be in disagree with Sharon, that she said that we had to approve. If that is the case, that is the case, well, we have more power than the board of president, because if we approve something and the board of president appoint us, so we have more power. I think we have to be realistic in our comments. And we have to see how is our input has to be listened. One of the issues, for instance, is, and I was very happy the other day, this is the first time in the community board I was extremely happy that I see that we say no to the applicant, because the applicant said the city needs jobs, and that's what I'm doing. So our community has to stand up and to say, yes, we need jobs, we want to support jobs, but we have to put the jobs where it's needed, not wherever it's crowded already, it's overdeveloped that community. So that is the point. We have to figure it out, how the community participation, it has to be listened in the process of planning. And the process of planning, it will take 10 years. At the end of the 5 years, we'll have an assessment. And what is wonderful of this plan is accountability. Accountability for the inept decision makers. And we have to pinpoint who is responsible where we are. We have $3 billion for affordable, for supporting housing, and the homeless is still on the streets. So that is the point. The point is, when we make a decision, that is our position as a community. We have to listen to in that direction, and they have to listen exactly what exactly they're going to do. Another point is, we have the historical districts, and we must maintain, and we have to be very vigilant that nobody can come and change in the name of equity the community, the special districts. The historical special district, because was created for one reason, and we don't create it. We inherit it, and we have to maintain that part. So this is the concern that we have to, when coming decisions like the blood center, the developer said, I need a place, and this is what I need, and this is going to create jobs, and the zoning resolution allow me to do that, and that I'm going to change. So we need to stand up. My guessing is, yes, we disapprove. Probably city planning is going to approve. Maybe they have a problem, maybe yes or maybe no, in the city council, but the mayor is going to say yes. They're going to go back to the city council, and city council is going to say, you know what, we don't have enough votes to veto the mayor. So our point is, should we have some power that if we are a residential community, that should be almost create something in this part that will be very hard to change to other uses. If they need to increase density, they have to demonstrate us that really they have enough service. We have enough housing. We have enough public schools. We have enough open spaces. We are a resilient community. But they have to present it to us. But we have to participate in the process. And personally, myself, I am reluctant to support any resolution unless we have to prepare, read it very careful, discuss each items that we want to put, and then we can vote. But otherwise, if any resolution is going to pass, I'm going to oppose, because that is wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Really appreciate those comments. So it's 8:28 now. I do see one other hand up, Michelle. I am hoping that we might be able to focus more directly on what we'll include in our resolution, so that way we could see a path forward. Michelle?
Briefly, one quick
Yes.
comment before Michelle,
Yes.
in part because I'm kind of curious to get her view on it, because she was the one who raised this issue. So I'm just looking at it again, and the long-term planning steering committee, the way it's composed, the mayor appoints 4, the speaker of the council appoints 4, each borough president appoints 1, for a total of 13 members. I mean, that actually strikes me as being pretty diffuse in terms of how it's appointed. I think the borough steering committee, certainly, again, as I said, I think we would want to replace them with a borough board. I think in terms of the long-term planning steering committee, I mean, that seems like it's pretty sort of spread out in terms of who's responsible for that, but we may want to tweak it a little bit or have other changes. But anyway, I wanted to put that out there to see what folks thought.
Will, can you unmute Michelle?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, agreed, Russell. I don't know that we need to comment on the one that we're concerned about is the steering committee. So we don't necessarily need to comment on the other. But I wanted to pick up on Marco's. I was remiss in not saying that I would like the historic districts and individual landmarks mentioned in our resolution for protection, because this entire plan doesn't say one word about that. And in terms of preservation, people work too long and too hard on those historic districts and individual landmarks. They speak to our history. We need to maintain them. We, as I always say, we don't have the Colosseum. We don't have anything 2,000 and 3,000 years old. We're lucky if we have a building from the late 1800s. So we need to put that in our resolution that we want those preserved. And otherwise, I think you've got the good points. I think if you read them out, then maybe even Marco will be able to get on board on them. I think we're being very targeted. And as I say, it doesn't preclude us making additional resolutions as we go forward. So I think we've done a pretty good job of overseeing, of stating the broad picture. And if we could put that in, I would be pleased with that. But I want to add those historic districts and landmarks.
Yeah, so that is one of the points I mentioned because it did come up last time, where it was, we observed that basically among the various different issues that are supposed to be considered, landmarks and historic preservation wasn't one of them. So that is one of the things I added. So maybe I'll read what I have and I'll just propose it as a resolution. So it is CB8 opposes the plan as currently drafted. And will oppose it unless it incorporates the following changes. The director of long-term planning should not be appointed by the mayor only, should be appointed either by the borough presidents or by some other combination of elected officials. The borough steering committee should be replaced by borough boards. The land use scenario for each community district should be chosen by the community board for that district. Landmarks and historic preservation and public safety should be added as subjects to be considered in creating the community district land use scenarios. No citywide targets should be implemented except with respect to resiliency, infrastructure, environmental sustainability, and sanitation. Community district land use scenario targets should be set by the community board except with respect to those issues just mentioned. Community boards need resources to do their own planning for their district and their land use scenarios, and in order to provide the quantitative and qualitative surveys provided for in the district needs statements. Wherever hearings are called for, there should be at least one in each community district. And then resources should be provided for community boards to create 197A plans should they wish to do so.
Any thoughts?
Elise has her hand up.
Okay. Elise, can you unmute?
So two thoughts on that. When we talk about the items that require targets, do we want to add in infrastructure as well? So that could cover the number of school seats that we need, or water and sewer conditions, or whatever the larger issue is. But I think we might want to list infrastructure within those targets. And then
within citywide targets? Because I think the community board could still set targets on those issues within the community district. And I think the question is, what areas are we sort of comfortable being set at a citywide level as opposed to the community level?
Okay, some of those, I guess it's kind of like Biden. How do you define infrastructure? So I think there's some value in including infrastructure within that. It's not necessarily just what the community would set, because we don't necessarily know what our water and infrastructure needs are, but I think it's something that should be incorporated, or at least certainly looking at items like school seats. And then the other item, we don't talk about the generic EIS, and maybe that concept was in having the resources to do our own and work on that. I don't necessarily have a specific example or a specific recommendation. I'm just wondering if that's something that we should think about commenting on, unless you think that's already taken care of in our comments about needing the resources to be able to do the planning.
I think the concerns about it are potentially addressed not necessarily in the additional resources, but in the fact that what we're calling for is for the community board to set our own community district targets. And so as I understand the sort of EIS provisions in the proposal, basically they're trying to create some kind of an incentive for development that is consistent with what the plan is. And one of the ways, I guess, that they do that is through, not eliminating EIS, but I think streamlining it basically for stuff that conforms to the plan. So I think if we were going to have a situation, which is what we're asking for, where the community board is setting the plan, then I think it still makes sense to have incentives so that, development is going to be consistent with our plan, basically, and we want to, enforce the plan that way. I think there's still benefits to that potentially.
Okay.
And to go back to the infrastructure point, because I think, I think it's certainly the case that the land use scenarios and the overall, they're called land use scenarios, but I think they're supposed to incorporate all these different areas. And I think I'm just going to read what the list is here that they talked about.
Will?
Here, I got it. Sorry.
Oh,
yeah. So, originally they were talking about, community district level targets for housing, jobs, including associated needed commercial, retail, and industrial space, open space, resiliency infrastructure, city facilities, school seats, public transportation, public utilities, and other infrastructure corresponding to each such district. And the idea is that the district land use scenario would be based on what those targets are. And so the concern was, if you have targets set by the city for all those different items, you're potentially sort of locking the community board into only particular types of scenarios that it would be able to approve. So I think the idea is we would still be addressing those particular issue areas, but the targets for those would be set entirely by the community board in connection with creating the land use scenarios, as opposed to being guided by citywide targets, which we would still maintain for those three, specific areas that I mentioned. But the idea is, like, for example, if our community board felt like we need more, transportation infrastructure, that's something we can incorporate into our land use scenario that we're writing for ourselves. And if we feel like we need more school seats, that's something we can incorporate into our, into our targets, into our land use scenario that we're writing for ourselves. I think basically the sort of theory is, like, if we know what we need and the kinds of things that are on this list are the types of things that we're likely to incorporate into our own plan for ourselves, then, we may be just comfortable saying that's going to be set at the community district level as opposed to having it set at the city level. But I would say, that having been said, I think if there's other issues that we want to put on that list of the types of things that we want to be done at the city level, I'm open to that. But that's, I think, the sort of broad outline of what the concept is.
Okay, thanks.
There's Michelle, Wendy, and then Tiana.
Yeah, thank you. Very, very well said, well put, Russell. I agree. I just want to make sure, I agree that the district, we ourselves want to determine our school, want to put in for school and housing and you know, in the whole structure of the community. What I wanted to know, because I don't remember in the document, does the document define land use? Because we're using land use to include all of those: schools, housing, transportation, even sanitation, which is now, we have that on the steering committee, you know, or the mayor's committee, I should say. But in fact, we would have liked to have, we had input, but nobody listened to us on the marine transfer station. So I'm not even willing to hand sanitation over to, and not be a local issue. But do we have to define what we're considering land use in our resolution? Can we say to include, and then list schools, housing, sanitation hubs, historic districts, landmark? In other words, if it's not defined in the document, I think we have to define it.
We could. I mean, I think it's, so what the document doesn't have, or the bill doesn't have a specific definition of land use. What it does is it says, first of all, there's going to need to be district level targets for housing, jobs, et cetera, you know, this whole litany of issues. And then it says there need to be land use scenarios for accommodating the community district level targets. So basically, it doesn't tell you what they mean by land use, but they are telling you that what they're describing as a land use scenario is going to include all these issues that are the subject of all these targets. So, I mean, I think we can put in there whatever we want. I mean, I've basically been trying to use the terminology of the, you know, bill as it is, essentially, in terms of talking about land use scenarios and stuff like that to you know.
I think, yeah, I get that. I think, let's put it this way. I think it would do no harm that where we said land use, we would say IE, and then give it our whole list of those things that we would consider land use. In other words, mention schools, housing, landmarks, et cetera, and we could say, you know, such as, which would not preclude us adding others in the future. I don't think it would do any harm to mention it.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, we can add that.
Wendy?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Can I make one other point? I'm sorry. Your opening line was, we are opposed unless, am I remembering that correctly? Unless the following? Is
Right.
that your opening? We are opposed unless the following is incorporated? I would say we are opposed to the current draft and structure of this bill, and in future discussions would like the following incorporated. So that we're not saying that if they put any of that, of what we're suggesting in, that we're an automatic approval.
Okay, so I'll just say we oppose the plan.
In other words, we fundamentally oppose the plan as drafted and structured, and suggest that it is lacking in the following, if you're doing it as a list.
You know, I would say we oppose the plan as structured and drafted, and that future iterations of the plan, because this is a draft, that future iterations of the plan include the following.
Yeah.
That's fine. As long as there's no implication
Or,
that,
you know, maybe just, we asked that it be modified to include the following.
yeah, but not to say that we're opposed unless it includes the following, because then they could put a partial of that in, and then I don't want the presumption that therefore we'll approve. So it's not an unless, it's that we want the next iterations to include the following, or to include but not be limited to the following, in case there's anything we're leaving out.
No, that's a good point, Michelle. You're right on point with that. Yeah. There's Wendy and Tiana.
Wendy, you can unmute. Wendy. There you go. You're
Did it work?
unmuted now.
Great, great, great. I have two whereases if you want them, but I did want to say, I also heard the word, like Michelle, I also heard the word sanitation, Russell, when you mentioned it in one of your iterations. And I was thinking that sanitation services, because I think that many would object if, for example, a sanitation, some sort of sanitation plant were put next to PS 198. You know, there's some sensibility here, even if the idea was that they needed to expand for safety of the good of the people, sanitation. So maybe we would want to say direct in that paragraph, direct services. But the larger point, actually, another point is in terms of EIS, our EISs. I remember when we were all meeting live, proposing that when developers want to put up a large building and they have to do an EIS, that they give us an equal amount to what they're spending, so that the community board can do its own, because he who pays for the study controls the study. And in any EIS needs to be the idea of what of climate change pollution. I know I bang on that as much as I can, but there, I'll just leave it at that. And I had two whereases, and here are my two whereases. Whereas communities are due a greater final determination in local zoning, land use, and development matters within their communities. And whereas the current iteration of the plan removes local decision-making in favor of centralized control, we therefore oppose the plan in its current form.
I mean, I'm not sure. Well, yeah, I think those are good. I would say, I don't know that I would say that it removes it.
Could just play with it.
Plan, but yeah, I think certainly to make the point that basically what we want is local control as opposed to centralized control. And sorry, what was the first one?
The first one was whereas communities are due a greater final determination in local zoning, land use, and development matters within their communities.
Okay. With regard to the point you made about the sanitation, I think what we're saying is basically sanitation targets could be based on a citywide target set, but ultimately the land use scenario would still be set by the community board in terms of what we're calling for. So I think the theory in terms of what we discussed before was
I totally agree.
You know what I mean? Like no one's going to sort of, you may not be able to rely on a community district to say, okay, we want X amount of X, you know what I mean? They may not set their own target. But once a target is set, you want the community board to be able to say, as to use the example you gave, right? Like, we don't want this near a school, we know where this should go.
Exactly. That's why I just wanted to see if that wording could be tweaked. I just couldn't write fast enough. So I just wrote down the word sanitation, and I kind of remembered it. Then Michelle brought it up also. So I thought we're all sensitized because of asphalt green and kids and all of that. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
I think it's addressed. I mean, I think it's addressed by the distinction between the targets and the land use scenario. So we're saying we can have citywide targets with that stuff, but we're saying the land use scenario for each community district would be chosen by the community board for that district. So in terms of where anything would be located, we would have the control over that.
And that's what we want. So that's excellent.
Okay.
Do you want the second whereas again, or you're kind of okay?
I think I had the gist of it.
Okay. Thank you guys.
Hi, so I just had 2 points. I'll be brief. The first is, again, it might be semantics, but, and I don't want to belabor the point, but the way we phrase the opening to me is actually very important. I really want to send a message that we are willing to work with the speaker's office on a plan that is reasonable to us. And so, well, Michelle, I understand your point of we don't want them to come back and then make our changes and then that's an automatic approval. But like, if those are the changes we want and they make them, then we're completely unreasonable if we don't want to approve it, right? Like, I think we have to, again, I don't know, Russell, the exact terminology, but I do think it should show that we are in its fine. We make that blanket statement that we are in its current form and structure opposed to it. But then the rest is, and again, I don't know if you were directing your comment to me, Michelle, but it's not that I need to be polite, by the way. I just think that it's important that we be reasonable partners in all of this, right? And that if there are changes that we would like to see made, that if they're made, that we can really come back to the table and potentially support something, right? So that's,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, sorry to interrupt. I was gonna say, listen to this and see what you think. So if we say CB8 opposes the plan as currently drafted and structured, we ask that the plan be modified to include the following. So there, we're saying very clearly, we don't like the way it's currently written, we oppose it. But I think we're also signifying pretty clearly that we're asking for these modifications, which I think implies a willingness to look at it if the modifications are made without committing ourselves to anything.
Yeah.
So we oppose the plan as currently drafted and structured. We ask that the plan be modified to include the following.
Yep, I like that. And then my second point was, and this was in one of the earlier, I think it was one of the first or two points in the resolution, where we talk about not wanting the appointment to be by the mayor, but then I think we're vague on who we want it to be. I just wonder if we should be more, I think you said something like not the mayor, but the borough presidents and some
Yeah, I didn't want
elected. I think if we can be more specific, like who do we really think should appoint this? Like, can we get more specific?
Yeah, I think there were various different sort of scenarios discussed last time. I don't think, I would say I think we discussed the possibility of having it be an elected position. I think we rejected that as an option, but I think we didn't specifically come up with who among the elected officials should do it. Let me see. I mean, I think basically the kind of two contenders were for the mayor to appoint the person with advice and consent of the Senate, or not the Senate, the council, right? So basically, the council would also have to approve the appointment, which gives makes it so it's not entirely in the mayor's hands.
Yeah, I mean that's reasonable. I think. I mean some version of that, or the borough president. I just think to the extent that we can be really specific about what we think would be fair. I think we should add that in if possible. That's all.
Okay. Yeah. The other option was to have it be appointed by the borough presidents, which is like that's sort of diffuse. But on the other hand, given that the boroughs all have different population levels, there was a question of whether that was really fair or not. So,
yeah, that's why I like the idea of the council.
Okay, so maybe that's the thing to do. So we just have it be appointed by the mayor and then approved by the council.
Okay, Barbara Rutter has her hand raised. Will, can you unmute Barbara?
Yeah, thanks. 2 points. Can you be careful what you say if it's the way it was phrased, and if I remember from the first meeting, the way it was in the document, that others can chime in, but the final say is the mayor, so it doesn't make any difference what you say. So the wording you had, Russell, with the say if they maybe with the approval of the council. In other words, who do you want to be the biggest decision maker?
And basically they have to agree, is it right? If the mayor has to appoint and the council has to approve, then there has to be somebody who can be acceptable to both the mayor and the council, because the council can't approve somebody who hasn't been appointed, and the mayor can appoint anybody that they want, but it's not going to,
Okay, so there isn't like one has the final say. The only other thing I would say, I don't know in the whereas clause, if we can have a general, we don't approve because generally speaking, I mean, generally speaking is because we feel that the community through the community board has very little say in this. So I wonder if there could be more of a general statement to say rather than just the specifics. I think if you didn't know the whole conversation, it would be hard to understand it's the details of what's being said.
Yeah, well, I do think, I mean, I think the first whereas clause that Wendy had proposed to say that communities are due a greater role in zoning and development.
Okay, I missed that. I'm sorry. That's what I wanted.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, but I think that gets the point across.
Yeah, and that's what I would have wanted to be added, and I didn't know it was. I missed it. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
we ready to call the question?
I hope Mrs. Brown, I hope Mrs. Brown,
Maybe you do it.
that's gonna be.
Please, please.
You know, so I'm giving you a heads up, Mrs. Brown.
Yes, just one comment before I call the question.
Okay.
Understanding that the mayor would do the appointment, make the appointment, I would like to see the city council and the public advocate approve the appointment. And would you call the question?
Yeah, that's a good idea. I like that.
Yeah, I'm open to that.
Diana, you're okay with that? Okay, yeah, love it.
All right,
Anybody want a second calling the question?
Michelle, Taina.
Okay. All in favor calling the question?
So if you're opposed, actually.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Will.
Seeing none.
No one is opposing. Okay.
Marco, are you opposing calling the question? Star
Wait a
six.
minute, Marco.
It doesn't matter because it's not enough to not call the
It's
question.
not enough. You're right. You're
Let's
correct.
just do the vote. So if folks who want to vote, folks who want to vote no or abstain, raise your hands, please.
Okay. Nay.
I'm abstaining.
Thank you. Marco, star six. Marco, you have to, there you go.
Thank you. I'm going to abstain until I read very well everything. Otherwise, I'm not going to support this motion. Thank you.
Last call for anyone else. Okay, and I'm going to read the names of the board members who are still here into the record. So we have Russell Squire, Sharon Pope Marshall, Barbara Rudder, Felice Farber, May Malik, Michelle Birnbaum, Ms. Brown, Peter Patch, Taina Barrero, and Marco Tamayo. Did I miss anyone? Great.
All right, so I think we probably adjourn, but before we do, I think there's a question of whether we need to have a meeting on June 3rd. And I think if we pass a resolution, we probably don't, but I just want to put that out there as something to discuss.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Russell.
The question is, do we think we need to still have another meeting on June 3rd? It's not clear. I mean, I don't think we do. What do you think, Sharon?
Yeah, I don't think so either.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't
Okay.
know
Yeah.
your hand, so yeah.
Mrs. Brown, I know you want to adjourn.
Yes, the motion to adjourn.
Thanks, May. Okay, May seconded. Okay, that's it.
All right.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so
Thanks.
much, everybody.